He was 18 years old when he returned to the place he was born, a place he only remembered in flashes of scent and light. What he found there was not a home, but a story of sacrifice buried under 2 decades of dust and lies. This is the story of how uncovering a hidden truth can give you a future you never thought you deserved. And if you've ever felt lost, like your own story was written by someone else, I want you to stick around, because what we're talking about today is reclaiming your own narrative. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in second chances, because that's what this channel is all about. The bus ride was the longest 4 hours of my life. Every mile that groaned past the grimy window felt like a link in a chain being pulled taut, connecting 2 versions of me I didn't know how to reconcile. There was the Leo who spent 18 years in the system, a collection of case files and faded photographs, a boy who learned to sleep through noise and eat fast, who knew that belonging was a temporary state of grace. Then there was the other Leo, the one who existed for about 30 seconds before they put me on this bus, the one who was handed a stiff manila envelope by Mr. Henderson, the director of the group home, with the words, "You're 18, Leo. You're free. This is what's left." Inside was a birth certificate, $212 in cash, and a single ornate brass key taped to a piece of cardboard. On the cardboard, in a woman's looping cursive, was an address, my grandmother's address. The farm. For 18 years, the farm was a ghost story. The official line was simple. My parents died in a car crash when I was a baby, and my grandmother, Elara, was too old and too frail to care for me. She'd signed me over to the state for my own good. It was a clean, sterile fact I had learned to live with. A smooth, hard stone I'd turned over and over in my mind until it had no sharp edges left. But the questions were always there, lurking in the quiet moments before sleep. Why were there no letters, no birthday cards, no single solitary visit in 18 years? The system had answers for that too. "It's better this way," a social worker once told me, her voice soft with practiced pity. "A clean break. It helps you move on." But you don't move on. You just build your life around a hollow space. The bus wheezed to a stop at a crossroads, marked by a leaning wooden sign, its paint peeled away by years of sun and snow. "Hickory Creek," the driver grunted, not even looking at me. "This is you." I was the only one getting off. The doors hissed open, and the air that hit me was different, thick with the smell of damp earth, cut grass, and something wild and sweet I couldn't name. It smelled like a memory I couldn't quite grasp. My only luggage was a worn military surplus duffel bag containing 3 changes of clothes, a dog-eared paperback, and the manila envelope. I slung it over my shoulder and stepped down onto the gravel shoulder. The bus pulled away in a cloud of diesel fumes, leaving me in a profound and intimidating silence, broken only by the chirping of insects. The address was another mile's walk down a dirt road that branched off the main one. With every step, the gravel crunching under my worn boots, the knot in my stomach tightened. What was I expecting to find? A frail old woman waiting on a porch swing, ready to explain everything with tears in her eyes. An empty, boarded-up house. The truth is, I didn't let myself expect anything. Expectation was a luxury I'd learned to live without. The trees lining the road grew thicker, their branches interlocking overhead to form a green tunnel. Then the tunnel broke, and I saw it. The house stood on a low rise, silhouetted against a bruised purple evening sky. It wasn't just empty, it looked wounded. The paint was more of a suggestion than a reality, peeling off in long, curling strips that exposed the weathered gray wood beneath. The porch roof sagged dangerously in the middle, and several windows were boarded up. The fields on either side of the long driveway were choked with weeds as tall as I was. A rusted-out pickup truck, a model from before I was born, sat listing to one side near a collapsing barn, its tires long since rotted away. This wasn't a home, it was a tombstone. Tacked to the front door was a bright orange piece of paper flapping in the breeze. My heart sank. I knew what it was before I was close enough to read the words. It was a notice of condemnation from the county, unsafe for habitation, subject to demolition. There was another crisper white envelope tucked under the notice. It was from a law firm representing something called Ridgeview Development Corporation. It was an offer, a cash offer to buy the property as is, for a sum that made my breath catch in my throat. $50,000. To a kid with $200 to his name, it felt like $1 million. It was a lifeline, a clean break, just like the social worker said. I could take the money, disappear, and start over somewhere new, somewhere the ghost of a family I never knew couldn't find me. It was the smart thing to do, the sensible thing. I walked up the 3 rickety steps, my boots echoing in the stillness. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling slightly. Then I remembered the key. I pulled it from the envelope. It was heavy, old-fashioned, with a complex filigreed head. I slid it into the lock. It wouldn't turn. I tried again, jiggling it, pushing, pulling. Nothing. The key didn't fit the front door. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Of course it didn't. Nothing was ever that simple. For a moment I just stood there on the sagging porch of a condemned house I couldn't even get into, holding a useless key and a letter that offered to erase it all for a pile of cash. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows that made the overgrown weeds look like grasping hands. A profound loneliness washed over me, so total and so cold it felt like drowning. I could just turn around, walk away, call the number on the lawyer's letter, and be done with it. But then I looked at the key again, the looping cursive on the cardboard, an address. It felt less like a piece of information and more like an instruction, a final command from a woman I'd never known. I wasn't ready to walk away, not yet. I had to know what was inside. I had to see the place where my story began, even if it was also the place where it had ended. I walked the perimeter of the house, my feet sinking into the soft, untamed earth. The foundation was stone, solid and old. Around the back, one of the cellar windows was broken, a jagged black hole in the gray stone. It was small, but maybe small enough for me. After a moment's hesitation, I dropped my duffel bag on the ground, lay on my stomach, and shimmied through the opening, scraping my back on the splintered frame. I dropped into darkness, landing with a soft thud on a packed earth floor. The air was cold and musty, thick with the smell of mildew and decay. A single sliver of moonlight cut through the broken window, illuminating a cavernous space filled with vague, hulking shapes. My eyes slowly adjusted. I could make out old canning jars on shelves, their contents long since turned to black sludge. A broken wooden chair, piles of rotting burlap sacks. In the center of the room stood a massive furnace-like object, an old wood-burning stove, its iron belly cold and silent. I felt my way toward a set of steep wooden stairs and climbed, pushing open a heavy door at the top. I was in the kitchen. Moonlight streamed through a grimy window over the sink, painting everything in shades of silver and gray. The room was a time capsule. A floral patterned tablecloth, stiff with dust, was still on the small kitchen table. A single cup and saucer sat beside the sink. It was as if someone had just walked out mid-morning and never come back. I moved through the house like a ghost, my footsteps stirring up clouds of dust that danced in the moonlight. The living room was dominated by a huge stone fireplace, its mantelpiece bare except for a single small framed photograph that had fallen on its face. I picked it up. It was a young woman with a kind, tired smile, holding a bundled-up baby. Her hair was dark, and she had the same eyes I saw in the mirror every morning, my grandmother and me. A wave of something hot and sharp pierced through the numbness. It wasn't quite anger, not yet. It was a deep, aching grief for a life I never got to live, for a face I'd never been able to put to a name. I set the photo back on the mantel, upright this time. Her eyes seemed to follow me as I continued my exploration. I went upstairs. There were 2 bedrooms. The first was small and bare, clearly a child's room, a simple wooden bed frame, a small dresser, and a single rocking horse with one of its rockers broken. My room. The other bedroom was larger. This was hers. A heavy oak bed stood against one wall, its mattress stripped bare. A wardrobe stood open, empty. But on the nightstand, next to a lamp with a cracked porcelain base, was a small cedar box. It was locked. I tried to pry it open, but it was solid. I shook it. Something rattled inside. A key. It had to be. Where would a person hide a small key? My mind, trained by years of institutional living where privacy was non-existent and hiding spots were a form of currency, started racing. I checked under the nightstand, taped to the bottom. Nothing. I ran my hands along the back of the heavy headboard. I checked the drawers of the dresser, pulling them all the way out to feel underneath. Nothing. I was about to give up when my foot scuffed against a loose floorboard near the bed. It was almost imperceptible, but it moved just a fraction of an inch when I put my weight on it. I knelt, my heart starting to pound a slow, heavy rhythm. Using my fingertips, I managed to work the edge of the board up. It groaned in protest and then lifted free. Beneath it was a small, hollowed-out space, and inside that space was not just a tiny, delicate key, but a thick, sealed envelope made of heavy parchment. My name was written on the front in that same looping cursive. Leo. My breath hitched. This was it. This was the answer. This was either the explanation that would heal that hollow space inside me, or the truth that would break me completely. I took the key and the letter and sat on the edge of the dusty bed, the moonlight falling across my hands. For a long moment, I just stared at the envelope, at the elegant script of my own name. It felt like a sacred object, a message sent across an impossible gulf of time and silence. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock the cedar box. The key turned with a small, satisfying click. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not another key, but a small leather-bound journal and another thicker stack of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. But my focus was on the first letter, the one from under the floorboards. It felt heavier than paper, weighted with the 18 years I had waited for it. With a deep, ragged breath, I broke the wax seal. The paper was brittle and the ink had faded slightly, but the words were clear. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then it means two things. First, that you have grown into the man I always knew you would be, strong enough and smart enough to find your way back home. And second, that I am gone." The words blurred through a sudden film of tears. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and kept reading. "I know you have questions. I know you must hate me. The story they told you, that I was too old, too weak to care for you. It was a lie, but it was a lie I told them to tell. It was the only way I could protect you." Protect me? From what? The words on the page started to paint a picture of a life I couldn't imagine, a life of struggle and fear that had been happening just below the surface of my own quiet tragedy. "This farm, Leo, this land, it's been in our family for 100 years. It's not just dirt and wood. It has one of the last clean water aquifers in this county. For years, a company, Ridgeview Development, has been trying to buy up all the land around here. They want the water. Most people sold. I wouldn't." The name was a jolt of ice water. Ridgeview Development, the same company that had sent the $50,000 offer. The same company whose letter was sitting on the front porch. "They tried everything," the letter continued. "They offered money. When I refused, they started to play dirty. They dammed the creek upstream, trying to dry up my well. They filed frivolous legal challenges against my property lines, trying to bleed me dry with lawyer fees. They were powerful, connected people, and I was just one old woman. But I held on. This land was your inheritance. I couldn't let them take it." I had to stop reading. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, overgrown fields. The moonlight made the tall weeds look like waves on a silver ocean. Inheritance. The word felt foreign, alien. In the system, you don't inherit things. You just age out and hope you don't fall through the cracks. "Then, your parents. That crash wasn't an accident, Leo. The sheriff ruled it that way, but I know it wasn't. Your father had been helping me gather evidence against Ridgeview, proof that they were illegally dumping chemical waste on the land they'd already bought. He had a meeting with a journalist. He never made it. My legs gave out. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, the letter crinkling in my fist. A car crash. A simple, tragic accident. That was the story, but this was murder. This changed everything. The hollow space inside me wasn't hollow anymore. It was filled with a roaring, fiery rage. After that, I knew I couldn't keep you safe, she wrote, her handwriting growing slightly shakier, as if the memory itself was a physical burden. They started threatening me directly. A cut brake line on my truck, a fire in the barn that I barely managed to put out. They made it clear that if I didn't sell, they would take everything from me, and I knew that included you. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I made myself a monster in your eyes. I called Child Protective Services. I told them I was unfit. I told them I couldn't handle the grief. I let them take you, my beautiful boy, because I knew the state, for all its flaws, was the one place they couldn't reach you. They could take my land, they could take my life, but they couldn't take the state's property. You were safe. And I prayed every single night for 18 years that it was the right decision. I was crying now, silent, hot tears tracking paths through the dust on my cheeks. I cried for the baby in the photograph. I cried for the young boy who scanned the crowd on visiting days, hoping for a face that never came. I cried for the teenager who had hardened his heart against the idea of family. And I cried for the old woman who had sacrificed her own heart, her own reputation, her own grandson's love, just to keep him alive. The abandonment I had carried like a stone in my chest for my entire life wasn't abandonment at all. It was a shield. I couldn't write, the letter concluded. I couldn't visit. Any contact would have put you back on their radar. It had to be a clean break. But I never stopped fighting. I spent the last years of my life gathering everything your father and I found, all the proof. It's hidden here on the farm. The journal in this box is the key. It will tell you where to look. They think they've won. They think with me gone, the land will finally be theirs. They don't know about you. You have a choice, Leo. There is money hidden here too, enough to start over. You can take it and run. I would not blame you. You owe this place and me nothing. Or you can stay. You can fight. You can finish what we started. The choice is yours. Whatever you do, know this. I never, ever stopped loving you. Not for a single second. Your loving grandmother, Ilara. I read the letter 3 more times, the words etching themselves onto my soul. The rage was still there, a hot coal in my gut, but it was joined by something else now. A fierce, protective love for a woman I had only met through a faded photograph and a page of ink. The choice she laid out was stark. Run or fight. The $50,000 offer from Ridgeview felt like a mockery now, blood money offered to the son of the people they had destroyed. Taking it would be the easy way out. It would be an escape. But I had been running my whole life, running from a past I didn't understand. Now, for the first time, I knew what I was running from, and I knew what I had the chance to run toward. The first light of dawn was beginning to break, filtering through the grimy windows as a pale gray wash. The house was still and silent around me, but it no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a fortress, an armory. My inheritance wasn't just land, it was a mission. I opened the small leather journal. The first page was a hand-drawn map of the farm, with cryptic notes and symbols scrawled in the margins. It was a treasure map, but the treasure wasn't gold. It was justice. I picked up the fallen photograph from the mantelpiece in the living room and tucked it carefully into the inside pocket of my jacket. I had my grandmother's eyes. I hoped I had her strength, too, because I wasn't going anywhere. This was my home, and I was ready to fight for it. I've been talking for a while now, and I just want to pause for a second. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where a single piece of information, a single story, completely rewrites your past? It feels like the ground beneath your feet has just vanished, and you're not sure which way is up anymore. But sometimes, in that free fall, you find a strength you never knew you had. You find out what you're really made of. For me, that letter was the moment I stopped being a victim of my circumstances and started becoming the author of my own story. If this is hitting home for you, if you've ever had to fight to reclaim your own narrative, I want you to know that you're not alone. This community we're building here is for people who get it. So if you haven't already, take a second to hit that subscribe button and join us. Your story matters here. Now, let's get back to the farm. The sun was fully up now, and the house looked different in the morning light. Still broken, still neglected, but not hopeless. The dust motes dancing in the sunbeams looked less like decay and more like sleeping magic. I spent the next hour with the journal and the hand-drawn map, cross-referencing the cryptic notes with the layout of the house and the surrounding property. Ilara's mind was a fascinating, intricate thing. Her notes were a mix of gardening advice, Bible verses, and what I slowly realized were coded instructions. Where the morning glory chokes the well, seek the heart of the stone, one entry read. Another said, the iron horse sleeps on a bed of truth. It was a puzzle, and with each piece I deciphered, I felt closer to her. I started with the well. It was in the backyard, a circular stone structure covered with a heavy wooden lid. A thick, ancient vine of morning glory had wrapped itself around the stone so tightly it seemed to be the only thing holding it together. It took me a full 30 minutes with a rusty garden trowel I found in a lean-to shed to hack away the thickest parts of the vine. The wooden lid was rotted through in places. I managed to pry it open. The smell that rose from the darkness was of stagnant water and cold earth. I peered inside. The well was deep, maybe 40 feet down, and dark. I couldn't see the bottom. I went back to the house and found a length of old rope in the kitchen pantry. I tied the trowel to the end and lowered it down, listening. It hit water with a soft splash much sooner than I expected. I pulled it up. Then I remembered the note, "Seek the heart of the stone." I started examining the stones lining the top of the well. They were all flat, gray field stones mortared together, except one. On the inside lip of the well, just below the surface, was a single, darker stone that was slightly loose. I worked my fingers around it, my heart pounding. It shifted. With a grunt, I pulled it free. Behind it was a small, dark cavity, just big enough to hold what was inside. A metal lockbox, rusted but intact. I carried it back to the kitchen table, my hands trembling with anticipation. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thick stack of $100 bills. I counted it. $10,000. A handwritten note was tucked in with the money. For the taxes and the lawyers. Don't let them take it for pennies, Leo. This is your seed money. Make something grow. I just stared at the cash. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was survival. It was a chance. She had thought of everything. She had armed me not just with the truth, but with the practical tools I would need to fight. The next clue was the iron horse sleeps on a bed of truth. The iron horse had to be the old, rusted-out pickup truck near the barn. It took me a while to figure out what bed of truth meant. The truck was sunk into the soft earth, its frame resting on the ground. I spent an hour digging around it with the trowel, clearing the weeds and mud. Nothing. I was about to give up, frustrated and covered in dirt, when I decided to look inside the cab. The door screeched open on rusted hinges. The interior was completely gutted. The seat was just springs and rotted foam, but when I looked down at the floorboards, I saw it. The metal floor on the driver's side had been cut and hinged, with a small, barely visible handle welded onto it. It was a hidden compartment. I pulled the handle. The plate lifted, revealing a waterproof document case tucked beneath. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were papers, official-looking papers. There were geological survey maps showing the aquifer, with handwritten notes marking discrepancies. There were copies of internal memos from Ridgeview Development detailing their strategy to acquire the Henderson property by any means necessary. And there were sworn affidavits from 2 former Ridgeview employees detailing the company's illegal dumping of toxic waste on adjacent properties. Their testimony directly implicated the company's CEO, a man named Marcus Thorne, in ordering the harassment campaign against my grandmother and in covering up the details of my parents' accident. This was it. This was the proof. This was the weapon she had left for me. I sat there in the dirt next to that dead truck, the sun beating down on my head, and I felt the full weight of what she had done. She had spent the last years of her life alone, fighting a silent war, gathering these documents, hiding them, creating this trail for me to follow, all on the faith that one day I would come back. The $50,000 offer from Ridgeview wasn't a lifeline. It was a trap. It was their final move to bury their crimes forever. They thought they were buying a worthless, condemned piece of land from some orphan who didn't know any better. They had no idea they were trying to buy a box of dynamite from the only person with the matches. The choice was no longer a choice. It was an obligation, a duty, to my parents, who I never knew, to my grandmother, who had given up everything. I couldn't take the money and run. I had to see this through. I had to burn their world to the ground. Back in the house, I used the last of my phone's battery to look up the property tax records for the county. My grandmother had been right. The farm was deep in arrears, on the verge of being seized and put up for auction. The $10,000 would be just enough to pay off the back taxes and stop the proceedings. The last entry in the journal was different. It wasn't a clue. It was a name and a phone number. Jessica Albright, Escrow. She was your father's friend from law school. She knows some of the story. If you choose to fight, trust her. Tell her you found the Iron Horse's bed. I had to find a phone that worked. I gathered the lockbox with the money, the document case, and the journal, and stuffed them into my duffel bag. I found a few old quilts in a linen closet, dusty but dry, and made a bed on the floor of the living room, right in front of the stone fireplace. I lay there as darkness fell, the photograph of my grandmother and me standing on the mantel like a guardian. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an orphan. I felt like a son and a grandson. I felt home. The next morning, I walked the mile back to the main road and caught a bus into the nearest town, a small, sleepy place called Harmony Creek. It had a single main street with a diner, a hardware store, a post office, and a small law office with a shingle that read Albright and Associates. I took a deep breath and walked inside. The woman at the front desk looked up from her computer, her expression one of polite boredom. "Can I help you?" "I need to see Jessica Albright," I said, my voice sounding younger and less confident than I wanted. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's important. My name is Leo Vance. Can you just tell her I found the Iron Horse's bed?" The receptionist raised a skeptical eyebrow but buzzed the inner office. A moment later, a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun emerged. She looked me up and down, taking in my dusty clothes and worn-out boots. "You're Leo?" she asked, her voice cautious. I nodded. "Alara's grandson." Her expression softened instantly. "My God," she whispered. "We wondered if you'd ever come in, please." She led me into a comfortable office lined with law books. She closed the door and turned to face me, her professional mask gone, replaced by a look of deep, genuine concern. "What did you find?" I didn't say anything. I just unzipped my duffel bag and laid the document case on her polished mahogany desk. She opened it, her eyes scanning the first page. She went pale. She sat down heavily in her chair and spent the next 20 minutes reading, her expression shifting from shock to grim confirmation to a cold, hard anger. When she finally looked up, her eyes were blazing. "I knew it," she said, her voice low and furious. "Your father, David, he came to me a week before the crash. He told me he had something big, something that could put Marcus Thorne away for a decade. He was so careful. He wouldn't tell me what it was over the phone. He was supposed to bring it to me the day after his meeting with the journalist. She shook her head, a look of old pain on her face. Then he was gone, and Alara, she clammed up. She wouldn't talk to me. She just told me to stay away, that it was safer for everyone. I thought she was just lost in her grief. I had no idea she was playing the long game. She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw a flicker of my father in her eyes, a shared memory I could never access. "Your grandmother was one of the strongest people I have ever met," she said softly. "What she did, giving you up, it must have destroyed her, but she saved your life, and she saved this." She tapped the document case. "This is enough. This is more than enough. Marcus Thorne thinks he's a king in this county. We're about to show him that he's not." Over the next few hours, Ms. Albright, "Call me Jessica," she insisted, laid out a plan. First, we would use the $10,000 to pay the back taxes immediately, taking the farm off the auction block and securing my legal ownership. Second, we would file a lawsuit against Ridgeview Development for wrongful death, harassment, and environmental damages. The documents I'd found were the cornerstone of the case. Third, she would leak copies of the most damning evidence to the journalist your father was supposed to meet, the one who had been quietly investigating Thorne for years. "This isn't just about money, Leo," she said, her voice firm. "This is about justice. We can't let them get away with this. But I need you to understand, it's going to be a war. Thorne will fight back, and he will fight dirty. They'll try to discredit you, paint you as a delinquent trying to cash in. Are you ready for that?" I thought of my grandmother, alone in that house for all those years. I thought of my parents, their lives cut short. I thought of the $50,000 letter, the insult of it. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I'm ready." The first battle was won that afternoon. Jessica wired the money to the county tax office, and just like that, the farm was mine. Legally, officially mine. The feeling was indescribable. It was like an anchor had dropped deep inside me, securing me to the world for the first time. That evening, I returned to the farm not as a trespasser, but as its owner. The condemnation notice was still on the door. I ripped it off, tore it into pieces, and let the wind carry them away. I walked into the house, my house, and it felt different. The silence was no longer lonely. It was peaceful. The dust wasn't a sign of neglect. It was a blanket of history waiting to be disturbed. I spent the next week in a whirlwind of activity. Jessica handled the legal filings, and the story exploded. The local paper ran a front-page headline, "Orphaned Heir Accuses Local Developer of Decades-Long Conspiracy." The journalist, a grizzled veteran named Peterson, published a devastating exposé online, complete with scans of the internal memos I'd found. The state's Environmental Protection Agency launched an immediate investigation into Ridgeview's properties. Marcus Thorne issued a furious denial, calling me a troubled young man being manipulated by a vindictive lawyer. But the damage was done. The truth was out. While the legal storm raged, I focused on the farm. I used the last of the cash from the well to buy cleaning supplies, tools, and groceries. I started in the kitchen, scrubbing away years of grime until the porcelain sink gleamed. I repaired the broken window in the cellar. I dragged the filthy, rotted furniture out into the yard to be burned. Every task was physically exhausting, but emotionally it was cleansing. I was scrubbing away the neglect, not just from the house, but from my own life. I was taking care of something. I was building. One afternoon, while I was clearing weeds from around the porch, an old pickup truck, much newer than my iron horse, pulled up the driveway. A man who looked to be in his 60s with a weathered face and kind eyes got out. "You must be Leo," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I'm Bill Abernathy. I live down the road. I knew your grandmother." I shook his hand. "It's nice to meet you." "I read the story in the paper," he said, his expression somber. "A lot of us around here always suspected Thorne was a snake. Alara was a good woman, stubborn as a mule, but good. We all felt terrible when you had to leave." He looked at the work I was doing, the pile of debris, the newly cleared patch of earth. "Looks like you could use a hand." Before I could answer, he went back to his truck and pulled out a heavy-duty brush cutter. "Let's get this place looking like it's loved again," he said, with a small smile. That day, Bill helped me clear the entire front yard. The next day, he came back with his son, and the three of us spent the day securing the sagging porch roof. Soon, other neighbors started stopping by. A woman named Mary brought over a hot casserole and offered to help me sort through the linens. The owner of the hardware store dropped off a truckload of lumber and told me to pay him back whenever. People who were strangers to me shared stories about my grandmother, how she'd helped them during a bad harvest, how she'd given them vegetables from her garden, how she'd always had a pot of coffee on for visitors. They were her community, and slowly, tentatively, they were becoming mine. The house began to breathe again. I found a box of my grandmother's things in the attic, her books, her records, a stack of photo albums. I spent hours looking at pictures of her, of my parents, of a life I was stolen from. But instead of bitterness, I felt a connection. I was putting the pieces of my identity back together. One night, I found her old record player. I put on a record, a scratchy old folk album, and the sound of a lone, clear voice filled the quiet house. I sat by the fireplace, looking at the picture on the mantel, and I felt her presence so strongly, it was as if she were sitting in the room with me. The legal battle was long and ugly, just as Jessica had predicted. Ridgeview's lawyers tried everything to bury us in motions and delays, but the evidence was too strong. The public pressure was too great. 6 months after I first set foot back on the farm, Marcus Thorne was indicted on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and illegal waste dumping. The civil suit was settled out of court. The number was staggering, enough to ensure that the farm would be safe forever, enough to rebuild it from the ground up. But the money was never the point. The point was the truth. The point was her name and my parents' names being cleared. The point was justice. A few months after the settlement, I was on the newly repaired porch, watching the sun set over fields that were no longer choked with weeds, but planted with the beginnings of a new crop. The house behind me had new windows and a fresh coat of paint. The iron horse was still there, a silent monument to the secrets it had kept. Jessica's car pulled up the driveway. She got out holding a thick envelope. "Final papers," she said, handing it to me. "It's all officially over. Ridgeview Development filed for bankruptcy last week." We stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from orange to deep violet. "What are you going to do now?" she asked gently. "All that money. You could go anywhere, do anything." I thought about it. I could leave. I could go to college, travel the world, be anyone I wanted to be. The idea was tempting, a true clean slate. But then I looked at the house, at the land, at the solid foundation beneath my feet. This wasn't a clean slate. It was a full one. It was filled with the love of a grandmother who fought a war for me, the memory of parents who died for the truth, and the support of a community that had welcomed me home. It was scarred and imperfect, but it was mine. "I think I'll stay," I said, and the words felt more right than anything I had ever said. "I think I'll make something grow." And that's where my new story began, not as an orphan aging out of the system, but as a man planting roots in the land his family had died to protect. It hasn't been easy. The scars of the past don't just vanish. There are still nights when I wake up feeling that old, familiar loneliness, that ache for a life I never had. But then I walk out onto the porch, and I feel the solid wood under my feet, and I see the stars, and I know I'm not alone. I'm home, and that's the real inheritance my grandmother left me. Not the land, not the money, but the understanding that home isn't a place you're given. It's a place you fight for. It's a place you build, one repaired board, one cleared field, one act of love at a time. What I want to leave you with is this. Your past does not have to be your prison. The stories they told you, or the stories you told yourself to survive, they don't have to be the final chapter. You have the power to find the truth, to reclaim your narrative, and to build your own home, whatever that looks like for you. If my story has meant anything to you today, please share your own story in the comments below. Tell me about a time you fought for your own truth, or a time you found home in an unexpected place. I read every single one because this is what this community is about, sharing our stories to remind each other that we are not alone in the fight. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the broken places. You deserve a place to belong.